So yeah, let's get back into this True Detective discussion that we were having. We started this a couple weeks ago where we wanted to do an episode per week. Obviously we didn't get to episode 2 last week, so today let's do episodes 2 and 3.
Definitely.
How does that sound?
Yeah, that sounds good. Episode two, Seeing Things. I would say not as much detail on the case for Cole and Marty. Dives a little bit more into their personal life. What do you think about that? Is that a fair assessment,
Oh
would you
yeah,
say?
absolutely. I think it's more character driven, getting more of, episode 1 introduces everything, the case, the characters.
Yeah.
Episode 2 is more, a little bit more of a breakdown into the psyche of each character, main character, anyway.
Mm.
And really, in my opinion, really explores the differences between Rust and Marty in terms of their view on not only life, but women, their roles as a man in society, their roles at home as fathers, husbands. And it really it starts off pretty quickly, when they get a clue, or a tip about this bunny ranch that they should go and investigate,
Yeah.
right off the rip, about where the victim that they're investigating, Dora Lang. Dora Lang, we discover, had spent some time at this bunny ranch, and Marty and Russ go and investigate.
Hmm.
The owner or manager of this bunny ranch, she can sniff them out, right away. And her and Marty particularly butt heads about
Yeah.
the idea or the concept behind the bunny ranch at all.
Yeah.
And I know you had a point you wanted to make about this. It kind of goes along with her telling Marty, why is it that, when a woman wants to, put a price on her body, that, men like you always have a problem with it. And it's her reasoning behind it is because she says, because you don't own it. And that kind of stops Marty in his tracks because it's like a realization. And there's almost like truth to it in his mind, it appears, like it does shut him up pretty quick.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. Episode one, you and I spoke thoroughly about, the Dora Lang crime scene. And it was really interesting, how it came up and, how we spoke on it. Where, okay, Marty is there physically, but mentally he is not there. You see Cole, he's drawing, he's taking notes, he's already just consumed by the case. And what was so interesting is at this gnarly crime scene, Marty's main concern is you gotta come to dinner. Right? His main concern is getting Russ Cole over to the house to meet his wife and family. And we spoke about that, and I found that very interesting. Well, coming back and rewatching episode two, Seeing Things, I picked up on it again very early off into the scene. Obviously, as you say, they're starting at the Bunny Ranch. They are there for business. They are there pursuing leads, leads that they came across at Dora Lang's mother's house to start the episode. And Marty's mind appears to be somewhere else, and it appears to be on the girls that are working the ranch and being rather than him being consumed by the case and asking questions about the case and trying to just get as much evidence or information to pursue as possible, he really is concerned with the girls working the ranch and why they're there and, their age. And I'm not saying he's wrong for doing that. And I hear where he's coming from, but if you just look at the professional approach, once again, between Cole and Marty, two completely different paths there. Cole has been on this case 110% since they found the body in episode one. And now you start to see a pattern with Marty where his mind is taking him to a different place rather than being consumed with the case as Cole is. So I just wanted to bring that up because I found that very interesting that this pattern that we spoke about 2 weeks ago is continuing into episode two.
Definitely. Yeah, that's a good point. And again, it just goes to show how easily distracted Marty can be, I guess.
Yeah.
Ultimately, that scene's followed up with it goes to show a little bit more about Marty's home life and what his relationship with his wife is like and his in-laws. And, it picks up with them at like a family gathering at his in-laws, and he's walking with his father-in-law. And there's clearly a discussion going on about politics and the state of the world. And his father-in-law, makes some comments like, it's sex everywhere you look, and
Yeah.
kids these days, they're wearing this black shit all over their face, and he's just commenting on what he perceives as the downfall, decay of society. And Marty, surprisingly enough, is, his response essentially is, I'm sure every old man and over time has had similar thoughts, but guess what? The world keeps rolling or keeps spinning. And he just brushes it off. Doesn't he wants to appear like this almost like progressive dad in a way. But that's also it's foreshadowing to what's to come in Marty's, reality at home with his daughters, which I find very interesting. Great writing and storytelling there for one.
Definitely to that scene, but if I may just backtrack a little bit, I mean,
Sure.
seeing what type of man he is, what type of men they are. Cole finds himself in a hotel room with a sex worker who, he's obviously there to buy pills to self-medicate what he has going on internally. But you see what type of man he is. She obviously offers herself to him, and he's like, no, like absolutely not.
I'm
I am
here for
not
the
here.
pills. Right.
I am not here for that. I am here for this, and to get some information on the case. Once again, that case is consuming coal, which is really interesting, with what happens later on in the season, with Marty and somebody he meets at the ranch. But we'll save that for another episode. But just piggybacking on what type of man Marty is. He finds himself back at his mistress's house, Lisa, I believe her name is, his coworker, and it's so interesting, that she also is talking about you want your cake and you want to eat it too. Very similar message than what he was getting at the Bunny Ranch by the owner. And obviously, it goes in one ear and out the other for Marty. But you really see what type of person he is, not just due to this relationship, but also him using the murders, him using the killings as a way to potentially keep a leash on his side piece, Lisa, which is very interesting as well. I mean, Marty has a wife with two children. And the mistress, the side piece is, something else that he has going on entirely, but he is just unwilling to accept the fact that she, does not want this for the rest of her life. She wants to go out, she wants to meet someone, she wants to make new friends, have fun on the
She
town.
wants to get married. Yeah,
She
she
wants
says
to
all
get
of those things
married.
to him. Yep.
And he is just so jealous. He is so controlling, if you will, to the point where he doesn't really, in my opinion, I don't know how you feel about this, but I don't believe he's really concerned about her running into danger. I believe he's really just
Oh
using
no.
the
Yeah, yeah.
killings, the murders, as a way to try to keep Lisa at home
Absolutely.
and under
Absolutely.
his thumb, if you will. So
Hmm.
very, very interesting seeing Cole turning down a worker,
And
and
the
then
same night,
the
the camera
same night.
pans to Marty with his
Yeah.
mistress and him, using, yeah, you're not going to want to go out these nights. I'm not supposed to be saying this, but there's a freak on the loose, and it's like all for control of the woman. And again, going back to what the manager of the Bunny Ranch says is, men like you don't own it anymore once a woman puts a price on her own body. And then, camera pan to the next scene, and it's Marty trying to put ownership or claim ownership over Lisa,
Yeah.
while having a wife at home who he just wants to have as a wife at home. We
Yep.
really find out, a lot in this episode, just the family dynamic of he's not interested in being the all-American dad. He just wants something to go home to at night that makes him feel secure. He wants the dinner on the table, the kids running around. He avoids any kind of fatherly duties or responsibilities as far as discipline goes, or dealing with issues, with his wife Maggie. He's very passive and just blows it off, and he wants his cake and he wants to eat it too. We get the infamous interview with Marty from the two detectives where he gets real dark and is talking about how he feels like his daughter was spared in a weird way. We,
Yeah.
we know his daughter passes away from a car accident when she's, only a couple years old. And it's crazy to think and to hear like a former father say that. But his logic and reasoning behind it is because of what she would be spared as a young woman growing up in this country or in society from men like Marty, essentially.
Yeah.
He doesn't know that necessarily, or nor is he necessarily taught. He does know it to a sense, but he's not necessarily referencing Marty. He's just saying in general, everything they're investigating with these murders and these sacrifices and rapes and sexual assaults. Like he's thinking about all of it when he's talking about his daughter being spared of the cruelty of toxic masculinity, and I just, that I always found that little monologue he gives is pretty intense, tragic, sad, but so true in a sense as well.
I love hearing you talk about, Marty wanting that family at home. Not really a present father, not really a present husband, but he wants that. And it's really interesting because in the episode one, he makes a comment to the two detectives, a man past a certain age without a family is a bad thing. And it's interesting. It's like, why is that, Marty? Like, why? Because you have a family, and what type of father are you? What type of husband are you? It's so interesting, that he's kind of like throwing dirt at Rust, really not having any clue, early off in their professional relationship about what Rust went through, but still like has the audacity to like think that way about him, when he's doing what he's doing, in his daily life. Once again, really highlights Marty, who he is as a person, what his core, shouldn't even say strengths, but what his core weaknesses really
Or
are. So very
motivations.
interesting. For sure. And yeah, we can head into episode three because, like I said, episode three, in my opinion, it's one of the best episodes. Obviously, episode two, seeing things, they come across the church, they see the birds spiral, which, by the way, is just an amazing shot. Quick question: is Russ seeing the birds spiral? Is that a hallucination or is that legit? What's your take on that?
I think that's legit.
Yeah.
Everywhere up until this point, and only two episodes in, but throughout the series, Rust kind of sees a sign or a symbol somewhere right before he finds a clue everywhere he goes. And I feel like that was, he observes these birds flying into a vortex, a spiral symbol, the same spiral symbol that we've seen on Dora Lang's body at the crime scene, the initial crime scene. And we see throughout episode two what his hallucinations actually look like. They're mostly atmospheric, and there's a play on the sky or the sun or the street lights. There's always something in the sky that has to, not much of like the physical world, it's more of up above in the sky, in the atmosphere. This, he gets out of the car and just turns around and these birds take off and form this spiral. Much different than any hallucination we've already seen Rust experience throughout the episode. So I don't think it's a hallucination. I think he does see it, and I think it puts makes him put his nose to the ground that he's onto something here at this
Yep.
burned out church. And sure enough, they find the painting on the wall of
Yes.
the crowned, antlered wearing woman,
Yep.
very eerily reminiscent of the crime scene, which leads
Right.
us into episode three. And something else I want to touch on before we get too far ahead. The end of episode two, Marty's having that discussion, that argument with his wife, and she's like, "Just go get your daughters for dinner." And he walks back into their bedroom, and they're playing with Barbies. And they leave, run out into the dining room, and he looks at the Barbies, and all the Barbies have their clothes off, and
Hmm.
they're like playing with these Barbies as if there's like an assault taking place on one of them, and it's really disturbing. And it leaves Marty in his tracks, just kind of like, what the heck are they playing here? But
Yeah.
he never addresses it.
Yeah.
Weirded out by it, sure, but never addresses it. Episode three starts off with their daughter getting in trouble at school, and she gets in trouble at school for drawing, like sexual pictures of, naked people. And they have this discussion with her at home, and they don't get much out of her other than I was peer pressured to do it. And
Well,
it
yeah,
leads him into having the discussion with Maggie, and Marty asks, do they even know what this is? They're, 5 or they're 6 or whatever.
yeah,
Why do they know about this already? And she's
yep,
like, girls always know about it before boys. And he's like, why is that? And she says, because we have to.
yeah,
And that
exactly.
just is like a perfect cap on the overall theme of episode 2. And it's like, huh, that's so true.
Yeah.
Um, and again, it goes right over Marty's head. Like
Yes.
he's investigating this diabolical crime, and Rust is the only one that like picks up on those types of things. Marty is still so consumed by his own vices, which are women, and preoccupied with his own affairs that he doesn't even really take the time to give it a second thought, where this is the beginning of the end of his family, essentially, as we'll come to see in the future, but he just doesn't care. He does not put his home life before himself whatsoever.
Yeah, absolutely, dude. And you bring up a major point that I was going to bring up, which is, when Marty finally does sit down with Maggie. Mind you, we're in episode 3 now. When Marty and Maggie finally sit down, with their daughter and talk about what she's been up to in school, the display of the dolls, they're having a very serious conversation. And what is Marty's main concern? The fucking basketball game behind his daughter. And once
She's
again, this kind of carries that pattern we talked about with him bringing up dinner in episode 1. Episode 2 being being way too caught up with the girls working the ranch rather than the case. And now here we are in episode 3. Marty's behavior continues. It just really shows he's just not there. He's not present. His mind really is never focusing on what is appropriate for that time. He's having a heartfelt conversation with his wife and daughter about her recent behavior, and he's peeking over his daughter's head to see what the score of the basketball game is. So,
right. And Maggie notices and
yeah.
gives him a death glare,
Oh yeah.
rightfully so. Yeah.
Rightfully so. And really quick, if I may, just a quick jump back to the birds from episode 2. I also agree. I agree. I don't think Rust is hallucinating, and it's never been confirmed, but I like to believe, I have a little theory on this. I like to believe that the bird spiraling up from the marsh is something that happens on the regular, and that ultimately is a major impact on the reason why the Carcosa cult, if you will, uses that symbol, because that church before it burned down was such a major part of their organization and what they were doing. Obviously, like you said, they had the paintings on the wall, and I think that is an unwritten part of the story where that's something they would maybe witness every morning or every night, before the sun goes up or the sun goes down, where they're outside, getting in their cars and they happen to look up and they see this
That's a good
spiral of birds, and I would like to think that's how they came up with their symbol. They're like, you know what? That's we're gonna rock with that because this is our base, if you will, and we're seeing this every night. It's like using it as a symbol. So that's not confirmed in the show, but I like to think that's why they rocked with
we don't we I like that theory a lot.
no, I just wanted to bring that up because it's so cool. And Cole goes out episode 2 saying, there were sometimes I thought I was out of my mind, and there were sometimes I thought I had all the answers to the fucking universe. And it was a really cool way to transition to episode 3. I do love episode 3. I love how they start off at the tent, the revival,
Yep.
led by Reverend Theriot, played by Shea Wigman,
He's
who, by
great.
the he's unbelievable. He is an unbelievable actor who plays in a large amount of HBO series, Boardwalk Empire, playing Nucky's brother. Plays in a great show called Waco about the Waco tragedy that took place in
Yeah.
the 90s. I mean,
Yep.
if you look up HBO famous shows, he's in damn near half of them. So he plays a terrific role. His preaching to start, it's like eerie, but like it's just so on point. Like, because the atmosphere is there. You look at that scene and you look at where they are. You look at the type of people that are there, and just listening to his preaching, just listening to his message, it is just spot on. And he does a phenomenal job. in his introduction to this show. And obviously later in the series, we see where his character goes due to X, Y, and Z. We'll get there. But one thing I wanted to bring up to you, if we may, is Cole and Marty. By episode three beginning, they're really starting to bash heads here. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, they're not really even trying to hide it anymore, try to like brush things off. If
Nope.
one person says something that bothers them, the other's just going right back to it. And they're at the church, and Reverend Theriot is talking, and Rust has a very, very strong opinion on the matter of religion and God, or the God that they're worshiping, if you will. And it's something along the lines of, if the only thing keeping a person moral is the expectation of divine reward, then that person is a piece of shit. And I know you and I have talked about this show so many times. There's so many things in this show I personally agree with Cole on. There's very few things I disagree with him on. Specifically, you bringing up, his mindset on losing his daughter. That's one thing where I don't really see it that way. But this is one thing that really has stuck with me ever since I watched it. For a variety of reasons, really two, actually. The expectation of divine reward. Well, what's the opposite of that? What's the opposite of that? I can speak personally. I've had so many conversations with people in my life about things I believe in, things I do not believe in. And one common question, this is not bullshit, this is true. One common question I get is, well, aren't you scared? Aren't you scared about what happens after you die? Really just based off of, their belief and what they were taught to believe in regarding, the Bible. And, it really it dawns on me how many times I've been asked that question because it makes me think of this quote, but opposite, where it's like, believe in X, Y, and Z, believe in this, or you're going to go to hell and suffer for eternity in blackness, in torture, burning, the lake of fire. I mean, really preaching that if you die on this earth, not knowing Christ, not knowing God, you will suffer. You will be tortured for not 10 years, not 100 years, forever, for eternity. And if you think about it, it is very terrifying for sure. But it's very interesting how many people have brought that question up to me personally when having religious talks.
Mm-hmm.
And then if we flip that, the expectation of divine reward. I mean, heaven sounds great. Heaven sounds great. It's all my loved ones that passed away are going to be up there. I got the big gold mansion. We got the gold streets. We got the diamond flowing rivers. It is
When dreaming.
one dreaming. It's paradise. I don't struggle with those negative thoughts, those negative emotions, those negative behaviors. It is paradise. And it's just so interesting how Cole points that out because I do truly believe, I don't want to overgeneralize this statement because I know for a fact, there's a lot of believers out there who are good, decent, genuine people, loving people. I know that for a fact. But what I also will say is I know there are thousands of people, I know a lot of them, who bank on going to church, who bank on how much money they throw in the offering, and just bank on believing, if you will, just to if get that get out of jail free card. Well, I'm a
Mm-hmm.
believer. I'm a believer. I believe in X, Y, and Z. I do X, Y, and Z. So, that is the expectation, divine reward.
Yeah.
And while I'm up there, I'm also avoiding, eternal eternal torture, if you will. And it's
Yeah.
just so interesting that Cole brings that up because my personal take is if someone is going to believe in, for example, Christianity is a big part of this show, then rock that, be that, let it influence you as a person, let it change you, let it
Mm-hmm.
lead to different thinking patterns and different emotions and how you behave and how you respond to shit that's out of your control. Let that shit flow through you rather than just using it as
Your
something
insurance
you throw at
policy.
your insurance policy. And I think that's something that Russ Cole, really speaks on in this opening scene. And I
Yeah.
just felt the need to bring that up because it was one of my favorite quotes in the whole show, and it's always stuck with me personally, you
That
know?
entire dialogue between him and Marty in that scene is one of the best, honestly. Like their riff back and forth,
Yeah.
Marty makes a point, Rust comes back. Marty makes a point, Rust comes like it's just solid writing. I like that quote too that Rust says in closing. Um, but he also is making a point on the congregation, the people who are there throwing their last few dollars into the offering pot. I look around, Marty, and I see that these people have a propensity for obesity. By the looks of things, none of them are splitting the atom anytime soon.
Yeah.
And Marty comes back and is like, you don't know these people. You don't know what they've been through or why they believe what they believe. And Rust acknowledges that, but the divine reward, if that's the only thing keeping people from doing bad, then I want to get as many of those bad people out in the open as possible.
Yeah, exactly.
In closing, Marty's like, for somebody who sure, doesn't think there's meaning to anything on this earth and no meaning to life or anything whatsoever, you sure fret about it a lot, which is also true because for someone who finds there's no point to life or point to anything, if time's a flat circle, then, we're gonna relive every moment on earth over and over and over again for eternity.
Yeah,
Marty is essentially saying, why are you bitching about it then? Like, if that's what you believe, then why do you sound scared about it all the time? Which is also a good point. They just
definitely.
they just riff off of each other so well, and
Yeah.
I like how the writing it keeps it, open-ended. It presents multiple perspectives and whatever fits for viewers. It almost converts viewers to like, okay, like I full-heartedly agree with some shit that Rust says, like he's got some great points and I'm like that's so true, like forgiveness doesn't exist. People just have short memories. You
Mm.
know? Do they actually forgive or did time just let things simmer down to where you forget about it enough, Like he's got so much I don't want to use the term wisdom, but like there's so much like subtle wisdom in some of the things that Rust says throughout the show to put things into a different perspective that somebody wouldn't otherwise think of. And I think that that's the whole point is he's challenging Marty's beliefs because Marty comes out and claims to be
Yeah,
Christian.
exactly.
Um, and Rust is essentially calling Marty out for the
Yes.
sins that he sees Marty perpetrating every day. Perpetrating, is that a word? And Marty being Marty, any proud individual stands up for himself and his own belief system. But yeah, it's just a great little dialogue there that ultimately leads into Rust's closing monologue of the episode, which we'll get to in a little bit.
Yeah, great intro. And it really is, obviously they've been button heads. It's really the first time Marty is standing on business, but like isn't bullshitting either. Like he truly does believe what he's saying. Now, does he act on it? No, absolutely not. But he's definitely standing on business with Cole. Could you imagine what life would be like if you didn't believe? And Cole, the exact same
The
thing.
exact same thing
The
that
exact
goes on
same
now.
thing they do now, just out in the open,
Hmm.
which is obviously foreshadowing, cult behind this. Obviously, we know what they believe in and ultimately what they're doing. But you also just brought up Marty too, like Marty. It's just such an amazing scene to start
Hmm.
episode three. It reels me in every fucking time. Starting with, like I said, the atmosphere. You're just in the middle of nowhere in this little revival tent.
Right,
And
right.
the casting choices was just absolutely unbelievable. So phenomenal way to start. And that Reverend Theriot, we'll be revisiting him, in another episode for sure.
He kills it too. He plays the perfect role of a reverend.
He does. And
Kind
if
of
I'm
kind of, raises your, just a little bit. You're like, could he be in on it? Like is he too sharp or too tactful with these cops?
Yeah.
Without giving anything, I'm sure everyone who's watching this has seen the show, but obviously he's not involved, but just creepy enough, I guess, but also seems genuine enough.
Yep.
I was happy that he was innocent, and like didn't have anything to do with it. But
Yeah.
yeah, great casting and good acting in that scene all around.
Something that, comes up earlier in the episode, Cole talking to the two detectives interviewing him. It's a little flashback to where he's interviewing another young man with the scars, and he immediately looks to Marty and is like, "Nope, it's not our guy."
Yep.
And he later says, when speaking is, "You want the truth? The truth is, I've never been in the room more than a minute with a guy and not known if he's done it or
10
not."
minutes. 10 minutes.
10 minutes, he says.
Yep.
Okay, well, keep that in mind for where I'm going because we get a hell of a foreshadow
Yep.
when they get a lead back to an old rundown school and they come up on the lawnmower man, who obviously, happens to be, we already know. We won't go there, we'll save it, but great foreshadowing as he's approaching the man on the lawnmower. You see on the church sign says "Notice King." Obviously, we're talking about the Yellow King, episodes 1 through 3. So unbelievable foreshadowing there. But one thing that always stick
Signs
with
and symbols, signs and symbols. Even in this show, the writers knew what they were doing, where they were putting,
yeah,
dropping clues on a billboard or whatever, like
yeah.
including it like the universe is telling Rust and Cole something, but the universe is also telling the viewer something right in front of us. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you are fine. I truly believe because he's talking to the lawnmower man. He's having a conversation with him. Now, he may not initially go in suspicious, but he's talking to him. There's obviously a sun glare. Dude's dirty, so you can't really see. And he's sitting down, so you can't really see how tall he is. But knowing Cole, if he would have stuck around for 10 minutes, I think he would have immediately, if you give Cole 10 minutes with the lawnmower man in that field, he's solving this fucking case. And
And
I
he's
think the writers did that intentionally, putting that line where he says, I've never been around someone for more than 10 minutes before not knowing if they did it or not.
absolutely, yep,
And what happens? He's talking to the guy, and Marty lays on the horn and pressures Cole. Let's wrap it up. We got a lead on Ledoux.
yep,
And that always stuck with me because I truly believe, if Marty doesn't rush Cole there, Cole breaks the whole case open right there and then. And I
yep.
think the writers did that intentionally, saying, no, I knew my guys within minutes. You know what I mean?
Every line of script in this show means something. Every
Yeah.
single line, and you're absolutely right. There's no other reason for them to put that line in here. In this episode specifically, when, right before he's introduced to the lawnmower man, his questioning, it's not even an interview, it's just a few questions gets cut short because of the police scanner going off. But
Yep.
it's also interesting rewatching it. I watched every episode before we do these again, just as a refresher. And it's crazy. I can't, again, thinking back to the first time I saw this show, there's no way you could watch that show and like pick up on it that he was the guy. And it's just so well made that like the viewer for the first time, you're not expecting, okay, we're on episode 3 and this guy's just cutting grass at a school. But like it's pretty clear as day that this guy has scars. The camera shot cuts away right as he looks back at the car when it's
Definitely.
honking, and you can see the scarring, that
Yep.
two people at this point in this show have called out this suspect has facial scars, and
Yep.
the the cinematography, the videography of filming him on just a certain angle for the actual viewer at home that you can't confirm that this is the guy. You're not even thinking that he's a potential suspect. But
Yep.
it just brilliant, really. I had no idea it was him until obviously the great reveal, like probably many others. Just goes to show the brilliance of, the filmmakers for this show. They just did a phenomenal job.
Absolutely. And not just, getting a small glimpse of the scars, right before the camera cuts. Obviously, he's dirty. It's a little sunny out. But, like I was saying, he's also sitting down,
Yeah.
So the only two things you know about him is he's got scars and he's massive.
We're
And
gonna lose it. We're gonna
they intentionally hid both of those traits, if you will, by the dirt, the sun, and having him sit down.
Yep.
Which is just, yeah, it's just amazing. So great foreshadowing there. Thanks to Marty, this case goes on for another, what, 15 years?
Seriously.
Um, I suck at math, but a long time because he rushes Cole, which is really idiotic because Cole is the guy who really does the majority of the interrogations, so he's out talking to a potential witness. You don't know who the hell he is. But the fact that Marty rushed him, bad, bad, bad play on Marty's part. But that leads them to a hot lead on Reggie Ledoux, Reggie Ledoux. as they then find out that Reggie Ledoux was the cellmate of Charlie Lang. So they're really starting to put some pieces here, with past witnesses, current witnesses. They're on the ball here. They're on their track. So, what do you think of the tail end of this episode? How do you think, episode three, wraps?
I think it ends with the best Rust Cohle monologue throughout of the entire series. He's breaking down the DBs, all the photographs of all the corpses that he studies, and we've talked about this loosely on some other episodes, I believe, but it basically is just, you can look into the eyes of any DB photo of any victim of a violent crime, and he's talking about they look like, or what you see is that all these people welcomed it,
Mhm.
going into the afterlife, whatever that looks like. They saw what they were in that last nanosecond, not at first, but just in that last nanosecond, and that they just let go, and it's peace, essentially. He
Yep.
doesn't come outright and say that, but that's kind of what he's insinuating, that you can just let go. And it's just
All of them.
it's kind of a creepy, eerie monologue. There's also like some peace and satisfaction and truth to it, in a way, like a hopeful feeling. But, in closing, it's life is a dream, and like a lot of dreams, there's a monster at the end of it. And that's how the episode ends, with the visual shot of Reggie Ledoux. And just
Terrifying shot of Reggie Ledoux.
right, he looks like a monster. And we come to find out that he is. But I
Yeah.
just think the ending's great. We get more of that in the next few coming episodes, but it really caps off the entire theme of episode 3, in my opinion. One of my favorite scenes is just him talking about life being a dream, in my opinion. Just it's great.
Yeah, absolutely. Piggybacking on, his monologue there to cap episode three. He's not talking about, this one, a few of them. He's literally talking about every DB picture he's looking at, everyone, literally saying, what they all have in common. They welcomed it, which is very interesting, especially kind of jumping back to, the conversation we were having about the beginning of episode three and kind of his current beliefs towards just everything, that the episode touches base on. So, great way to end episode three.
And
It's going to lead.
we're gonna remember that quote for
Yeah,
future episodes we have, because it, again, in my opinion, it ties all in together in various episodes, with people who die, people who have near death experiences throughout the series, and I just, again, every line means something throughout the series, and I feel like that line especially holds a lot of value that we'll come to see in the future.
yeah, absolutely. And, it leads us to episode four, which is, believe it or not, I think a lot of people look at this as the black sheep of the series. I've had numerous talks with people about it, and they're like, "Oh, I hate that biker episode." Who goes there? Episode four. We're gonna get into that next week. I can't wait. That is my favorite episode of the series, and it holds my favorite sub character, Ginger. He fucking kicks so much fucking ass. Not literally in the episode, he gets his ass whooped multiple times, but still just an unbelievable course where this case takes Marty and Cole, specifically Cole, bringing him back to his old mule days, if you will, where he has to reconnect with a lot of his old contacts and go back to doing a lot of shady shit. So we're gonna be diving into that next week, and I'm looking forward to it.
Likewise, yeah, it's a great episode. To me, episode 3 is kind of the build up to 4 and 5, which I think are peak. Aside from the finale, obviously the finale is great, but yeah,
Yeah.
looking forward to it a lot.
Well, Before we go, guys, we just want to say thank you all so much for tuning in. Please, if you're new here, hit the subscribe button, smash the like, and be sure to turn on your daily notifications so you don't miss any of our daily content. Stay tuned on our TikTok account and stay tuned for our weekly releases on YouTube, both shorts and actual videos. Guys, thank you so much. Keep coming back. Ah, God damn it. Hey, what's going on, everybody?
Fucking
Welcome to
mother horse. Shit.
Fucking mother. Oh, shit. Forgot about that. Let me talk, Carol. Well,
Well,
if
if
you
you
would
would
let me
let me
talk.
talk.